Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dandavat Pranam devotees. So, I received a request from a family to. Apparently they saw, and these had to be very old, I know they were from some years ago, that because I had not been able to sit to write a book and then coordinate the writing of that book with other persons who participated in the pioneering of the preaching, especially in West Africa, I had done a series of videos kind of just giving a sort of glimpse into that time. And I think they might have saw one section of it or something, and they asked if I could redo that series. And I thought, that was like, I think 10 different sessions covering the time of serving the mission of Al Srila Prabhupada and Mahaprabhu and our Guru Vargas in Africa. And that would have been too long. So I wrote back to them and told perhaps I could just do a synopsis, maybe in this one video, to kind of speak to that time and the events that took place then, and the nature of the wonderful feeling of pioneering preaching in Africa. And of course also I mentioned that there's always going to naturally be some shyness to speak about myself in relation to things. So I'm begging maybe some indulgence to make the narrative and the story of what happened clear. Then it was necessary for me to speak about some things in my own background and some of the things that I felt were part of the perhaps destiny to have the blessing of serving Mahaprabhu's mission by trying to do pioneering preaching there in West Africa. So first of all, there were many persons who at different periods of time after the genesis of the preaching there contributed to the overall manifestation of Mahaprabhu's movement being firmly established, especially in West Africa, I'm speaking now. Which was Nigeria, Ghana, and of course, I think maybe later on, I had visited both Sierra Leone and Liberia, but I think maybe preaching was more established there later on, and other places in West Africa, especially in Ivory Coast and other places. So maybe let me just start at the beginning, try to make it in a story format, and I think that may be a little more interesting than trying to pick out pieces here and there. And also, I think I just wanted to acknowledge the great effort of so many devotees whom I will name, perhaps maybe near the end when it can become, more clear. Those devotees that I can remember whose participation was so instrumental. So, and I'll beg now and I'll beg again then that if I have forgotten anyone or did not mention anyone, please do not take offense, and please you can write in the comments your name and participation, etc. So basically, I started visiting the ISKCON Society in 1972 in Brooklyn, New York. The society was located at 439 Henry Street in Brooklyn. And it so happened that I had an uncle, and let me do this. I'm going to grab this picture. Just give me a second. So this is a picture of my uncle. So I guess there might be some glare in the picture, everything. Oh, there's a better shot of it. But this picture was taken in the early 50s. And this uncle of mine was a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. And he taught Kriya Yoga and Hatha Yoga from the time of the 50s. And so at some point, he came to live with my mother and myself and my family in New York. So when he came to live with us, he, sort of took a special liking to me and to my elder brother, Haridas Prabhu, and wanted us to be engaged in practicing yoga and so forth and so on. So of course I was young, so my enthusiasm was more for playing and sports and so forth and so on, not really yoga. But my elder brother, Haridas, he kind of insisted, no, we should do this. It'll be beneficial for you as you grow up. So long story short, we became involved in studying yoga with him. And he was not just teaching Hatha Yoga, but he was teaching the principles of Kriya Yoga and all of the philosophical things. It was the first time I had heard words like Atma and Paramatma and even about some scriptures like Bhagavad Gita. So now to advance the story, he was very, not an outgoing person. He was very introverted, is the word I'm looking for. And he, at one point, wanted to understand the nature of Krishna's Mosala Lila. The Mosala Lila is when Krishna winds up his pastimes. So he wanted to understand that pastime, and he had me to, by phone, call the Brooklyn Temple and get as much information as I could from them about that particular pastime. So of course, obviously in 1972, I don't think devotees were very steeped in understanding what was Mosala Lila, etc. Obviously the 11th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, had not even been produced at that time, so most references for everything were from Krishna book, that first trilogy of books by Srila Prabhupada. So when I called the temple, the devotee was very kind, and he said, we don't normally speak about those things on the telephone, but if you will come to the temple, we have several books that we can give you, and those books describe everything you want to know and more. So at that time there was no Uber, so we called what was called a gypsy cab, which was back in the day maybe an Uber. And my uncle gave me $50 and the cab fare and wanted me to buy as many books as I possibly could and just go to the temple, pick them up and bring them back. So going to the temple, devotee was very kind. He gave me a number of books, including Krishna book and Bhagavad Gita as it is, and some Mahaprasadam. And so I returned with the books and everything, and immediately my uncle sat me down and he started looking for this information on the Mosala Lila. Of course, there was very little written. Maybe a section in Krishna book was written about Krishna's concluding of his pastime, so forth. But he did really, really appreciate this Bhagavad Gita, because previously he had only had like excerpts of Bhagavad Gita, and they were basically impersonalist commentaries on Bhagavad Gita and so forth. So now to have Bhagavad Gita as it is and very clear explanations, he was really excited. So he'd have me read Bhagavad Gita to him and then, kind of discuss it. Anyway, long story short, that led to me going to the ISKCON temple on a regular basis after that, especially on Sundays, because the devotee told me they have a regular program on Sundays. So he would literally give me the cab fare to go every week, to go to the temple, bring back some more books, and I would then, of course, stay for the Sunday feast and program and everything else. So that was the beginning of my sojourn with Krishna consciousness. And later on, after I had gotten out of high school and started college, but then I was a little, what should I do? I wasn't fixed on a particular career. I went to prep school, and after I got out of prep school, I went and I started to do a pre-med program. But as a teenager, and the idea that I would need to take remedial courses on Saturdays and Fridays, didn't align with my social agenda, if anybody knows what I mean. So that was out. So anyways, I started, I stayed in school for a little while, and then I decided I wanted to travel. I wanted to do something. So I joined the military and, of course, spent time in the Air Force. So it was the end of the Vietnam era, and they were giving early outs. So after being in the Air Force for, I think, almost 3 years, I decided to take the early out because they would also continue to pay for my going back to school, which I did, and so forth. But then on a break from school, I had decided that I wanted to sort of live in the ashram full time, because all the time I was in the Air Force, everything, I continued to study Bhagavad Gita, continued to read the books. So some encouragement and enthusiasm had come in my heart that I want to live in the ashram and have the experience of living full time in the temple. So when I left the Air Force, I came back to New York, but because I had began to play music. I studied music before, but I began playing music, and then I began playing music professionally. So I got caught up in that, and that kind of prolonged my being able to execute my desire to go and live in the temple per se. But at any rate, maybe due to previous bhakti samskars or whatever, Sukriti, somehow or another there was enough of an impetus for me to say, listen, I'm going to put music on hold and everything else. And I was in college, again, completing college at that time, that I'm going to put all of that on hold, and I'm going to join the temple and, live ashram life and really try to dedicate myself. So I thought that New York City would be difficult for me because I was working there so much. I didn't want the distractions. So I went to Los Angeles, and that was in 1975. I joined the temple there, New Dwarka Temple, and I believe that was the first Bhakta program. It was run by one devotee now, Pujapad Dhanavir Maharaj, and one other devotee. And I joined that program and stayed there. I think I was there for maybe almost a year. And I had written actually to Srila Prabhupada, because at that time he had to write a letter to Srila Prabhupada to request initiation, etc., etc. So I had done that. But what happened was mail came. My family sent me some mail there, and in the mail was a letter from the Veterans Administration saying, we've seen that you've missed, I think it was 2 semesters already of school, and that if I did not, go back and begin to, finish school or whatever, then the stipend that I had been getting would be terminated. So long story short, I started contemplating, well, I don't know what will happen long term in terms of, my life. I mean, will I ever, get married or do anything else? So I really at that time thought perhaps I should finish school. I should try to create some kind of basis under which I could have a life and practice Krishna consciousness, under those conditions, rather than to just, at that time, try to just full bore stay in the ashram. So I'm giving all this just as a backdrop to going to Africa, basically. So then what happened was that I did go back, and I did go ahead and finish school and what have you. But what went on then was that, again, being back in New York City, the phone begins to ring again, and oh, you're back. And so a whole second iteration of a musical career evolved, and I started to become very involved in working in various musical arrangements, everything from recordings to doing plays on Broadway to working with obviously various groups and traveling, everything. So it was successful. It was enough for me to make a living. And so I did that. And I kind of balanced that with continuing to do a morning program and continuing to study and to chant my rounds most of all. So I never gave up those things. One was a morning program, chanting of my rounds, and reading. So I always remained doing those things, but I never felt the same level of satisfaction, obviously, of, what it was like to live in an ashram and be fully immersed morning to evening in nothing but practice of bhakti. So around 1979, music career was good, and, I was able to make a living, and my older brother had a business, and I was part of that. So I wasn't having financial difficulty or anything. and I felt like I had at least a semblance of bhakti in my life. So I felt that that was sufficient, but somehow or another I felt haunted always that no, I want more in terms of bhakti. So at any rate, in 1979, I used to work during the day, and in the evenings, I would take my dinner primarily at Govinda's restaurant on 55th Street, because it's when devotees had the big temple on 55th Street in Manhattan. So I would go there almost every evening because my work schedule kind of involved doing recordings during the day and then sometimes playing classes in the evening and so forth. And one of the places that I worked pretty consistently was right around the corner from the temple. So I would take my dinner there at the temple. Once while I was there, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami and Brahmananda Swami, he was sannyasi at that time, sent somebody down to the restaurant and told me that His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and Brahmananda would like to meet you. So I said, sure, yeah, So I went upstairs and I went in the room and met His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami and Brahmananda Swami. And Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj asked me at that time that he was working on various projects in America, and also he was developing a collection of books for Africa and so forth, and would I like to give a donation, and would I like to help him in the communities where I was playing music and all these kind of things, would I help him arrange some programs for preaching? So I said, sure, I'd be happy. I gave a donation, and then I remember arranging some preaching programs for him at various places where I had some kind of social connection in Harlem and different places. So after that, the desire to really then again pursue full-time spiritual life was, sort of at its peak in my heart at that time. That no, I've done music. I felt like I had a successful musical career. I felt like I had made a living and so forth and so on. But I still felt a kind of emptiness around not having the full engagement in Krishna consciousness. So I decided at that time, again, that I wanted to join the ashram. At that time, I had a partner at that time. And so she also obviously had to be on board with that. And long story short, she decided that was something she was willing to do. So again, to avoid the disturbance in New York, I went back to Los Angeles. But this time, 1979, of course, in 1977, Srila Prabhupada had entered Samadhi. And so I did not find the same atmospheric conditions that I experienced in 1975. And I wasn't feeling as enthusiastic. So I made a phone call because His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj had told me, if you have a need, you can call me. He had a project based in Washington, D.C., so I made that phone call, and he said, yes, well, if you're uninspired there, then, without creating disturbance or anything, then you can come here to Washington, D.C. So, of course, myself, my partner at that time, we made the trip to Washington, D.C., and we began to serve under His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami at the Govinda's restaurant in Washington, D.C. So it was a little bit different in that it wasn't a large community that I experienced in L.A. It was rather small, but everyone was very intimate in terms of a close-knit group and working closely with leadership, meaning Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and doing all of the same things, Harinam, various things, but the restaurant was also a key focus of preaching because so many people came in the restaurant. And because it was located on Capitol Hill, that meant also politicians, all kinds of, other people would come into the restaurant on a regular basis. So it was really a kind of inspired preaching at that time. The preaching began to expand. There was one of my godbrothers now, His Grace Sanatana Goswami Prabhu. He was one of the sort of foundational people in terms of helping the economic status of that place go on, because he had a business along with another devotee, and other devotees would go out to do collections. So in other words, the place was able to easily function, and preaching was also very, very good, and the atmosphere was also very nice. So here is where we pick up the story, beginning of the preaching in Africa. So one morning, this is in the latter part of 1979, we come down because every morning in the restaurant, before we would open it, we would have our classes there. And we were about to start Srimad Bhagavatam class, and His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj began Jai Radha Madhava, but then he stopped abruptly and he said, I am going to send two devotees, myself and a devotee named Papastaya Prabhu. I'm going to send you to the Mayapur festival in India, and from there you're going to go to Africa to join Brahmananda Swami so that we can start, expanding the preaching in West Africa. So I was, of course, a little bit in shock. There was no mention about how, when, why. Papastaya was a brahmachari, and there was no mention whether my partner would be going or not at that time or anything. So then it was like really interesting phenomenon, because I was, okay, this is interesting and exciting all at the same time. But anyways, later on, we didn't end up going to India, needless to say, but I got a one-way ticket to Lagos, Nigeria, stopping in Dakar, right, which is, that was the first stop there, right, and $10 US. That was my travel fund, $10 US and a one-way ticket to Lagos, Nigeria. So Papastaya Prabhu ended up not being able to go as well, so I had to go alone. But I do remember, and the reason I brought up the previous history also was because my uncle, at one point, when I was, getting into my teenage years and becoming involved in athletics and martial arts and all kinds of other things, I was really at that point not really maintaining a consistent practice with yoga and everything. So we would have these discussions about how important it is, and eventually I got into a point where I said, well, listen, I was, this is part of my college days, and there was obviously also a secular interest in Afrocentricity and what was going on in the political dynamics of the African-American community at that time. And I remember saying that to my uncle, like, what will yoga and everything do for that purpose? And he looked at me really, really sternly, and he said, if you keep all of the training and what you've imbibed, and you continue to go to the temple and continue your practice, you'll have an opportunity to do amazing things for your people. Because he would say like that, because I kept saying, our people, he said, you'll do amazing things for your people one day. Jai Haribol Sadhan Siddha Prabhu. So that resonated with me as I was going to the airport, that almost like prophetically he had said that something would happen which would be a real hallmark point in my life in terms of doing service, because I also did a very deep dive and study into African cosmology, because I was a drummer in part, and had studied a lot of the African traditional spiritual theology and so forth and so on. So it's like so many things were intersecting at that point, that now I was actually going to Africa to serve the mission of Mahaprabhu, and all of the background I had and all these studies, all of that, and what my uncle had told me, this was all like intersecting at that time, and it was really pretty amazing. I remember arriving, the plane stopped first in Dakar, and when the doors opened, because a lot of people deplane in Africa right on the tarmac, and then you just walk to the terminal. So when the doors open, you get, just like when anybody's going to India, right? That first time you go to India and you land and the doors open, and back at that time you get the tropical air that floods the plane when the doors open. So it's very similar to that. So though my flight was going on to Lagos, I walked to the front and just looked out, and that was my first time seeing Africa, right? So that was my first time having any vision of Africa, and it was really, kind of awe-inspiring because I thought now I'm here doing a genuine seva in Bhakti, and I was just like really, really overwhelmed. Then we boarded back again. Anyway, I went and sat back down, and then the plane took off, and we landed in Lagos, Nigeria. So, of course, my first worry was getting in the country because at that time I only had a one-way ticket, so I didn't know what would be the response to customs and all of these things and immigration having a one-way ticket. And I had $10 US, right? So when I got there, of course I had a letter from Brahmananda. And so I presented all of that. And the immigration agent asked, well, do you have a return ticket? And when is your planned date of return? So I told him that everything had been arranged by our organization, meaning, ISKCON, etc., and that I had this letter. So I presented the letter to him, and he said, well, normally this would not be sufficient for entry with a one-way ticket. If you had a round-trip ticket, then, even though your financial status is, meager, what to speak, $10 US, at least we could vouch that you have an organization backing you. So he said, but, because, you are claiming an organization here, we'll take the response that they could provide you with a return ticket. So anyway, long story short, he gave me entry. So after that big anxiety was lost, I was like very happy because now I was here and, there was no chance that I was going to be put back on a plane coming back without having a chance to do this seva. So I went outside, got a taxi. And of course, in Nigeria, one of the things is that taxis is not just yours exclusively. In many cases, just like in India sometimes, they can take other travelers. So one of the things that I did notice when I arrived in Lagos at that time, this is 1979, was the opulence, right? So I had not been to Africa, but I had done a lot of study on Africa. So I knew that Africa, was very urban in many places and, very modern in many places. So when I arrived, the opulence was kind of overwhelming because at that time, obviously, Nigeria was in the midst of the oil boom, and so there was money everywhere. So anyway, I got a taxi, and the taxi waited like 30 minutes before leaving. So I'm like, well, what's going on? And then two very wealthy, aristocratic, a male and a female, man and woman, I guess husband and wife, got in the taxi also. And I had on tilak, and I was shaved and everything. So they asked me, oh, who are you and what are you doing, and etc. So right from the very beginning in the taxi, I had an excellent opportunity to start preaching. And I had one book with me, which I was reading on the plane going. And I remember giving them that book. I can't remember what it was. It maybe have been Life Comes From Life. I can't remember what book it was. But I gave them that book, and I was the first to be dropped off. So he dropped me off. And no, actually, I was second to be dropped off. So the cab driver got out to go and get my bags, everything. And I gave him $10, and I gave him the $10 US, and I was waiting for the change. And while I was waiting for the change, he was looking at it, and he said, like, where's the rest of the money? So I said, no, this is US dollars. So he said, yeah, but this is not enough as a ride from the airport. So he wasn't taking my bags out of the trunk, so then I started to panic a little bit. Well, how is this going to work out? So then one Indian gentleman who lived, and let me describe where he pulled up to. So this area in Lagos is called Surulere. And it's a kind of, it's not the top of the line area. It's not the bottom either, but it's not the top of the line area. And it was just a small flat, very much like if you go to India, you'll see, kind of small 2-story flats or whatever. So on the bottom, the flat belonged to one company. It was called Sun Factory, and it was a gentleman from Bombay who owned a textile firm that made plastics and so forth. So they owned that building, and the employees lived there, but he had given one apartment there, which was a 2-bedroom apartment, to Brahmananda Swami. So one gentleman who was a worker there, he came out from downstairs when he saw the taxi there, and he saw me. And he came out and he spoke to the cab driver and told him what the situation was. So the cab driver reluctantly just agreed to take the $10 and allowed me to go about my way. So anyway, at that time, the gentleman invited me into the apartment. He told me that Brahmananda Swami had gone with one other gentleman to sell books as they did every day downtown, and that he would be back a little later on in the afternoon. So it must have been around 1 or 2 o'clock. So I decided that I would accept the hospitality of the Indian gentleman. And I went in and I sat down, and he asked some questions, where are you from? And we did the small talk. And he said, would you like anything to eat? So I said, well, no, because I packed up some prasadam actually from the restaurant before leaving, and I still had some of that and so forth, so on. And plus, I don't think I took anything on the plane because, the idea was that, as devotees, we don't take anything from anywhere. It's a vegetarian supposedly on the plane, but I just didn't trust it. Plus, I had prasadam. Anyway, so he starts cooking, and all of a sudden, this huge smell of burning flesh comes through the doorway. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm sitting there, almost a little nauseous practically. And then my next surprise is I'm sitting in the chair, and suddenly, like a fairly large-sized lizard runs from under the cushion of the chair and runs across my shoulder. So now I'm going through a kind of like, what is it? Not culture shock or anything, but it's a kind of sensory overload. There's the smell of dead flesh in the kitchen. There's, insects different places and lizards running around randomly. So I'm really kind of in sensory overload. So then he brings out his plate with some rack of some sort of dead animal on it and everything. And he says, well, I know you guys don't eat meat, but I can scrape some of the vegetables out of the pot and give you that. And I was like, no, thank you. I'm like, good. And I showed him my little, I had a tiffin. And I showed him the tiffin. I said, oh, I have a little bit of prasadam left, and I'm pretty full anyway. And I said, I'd like to see the area, so I'm just going to wait outside. So that was my way to escape and to get outside. And I literally sat out there until Brahmananda came at around 5 o'clock. And he pulled up in a little Daihatsu, which is a very small sort of stick shift van. I don't think we have them here in America. But anyway, the Daihatsu was the vehicle they were using for going out and traveling and book distribution, so forth, so on. So at that time, Brahmananda got out of his vehicle, and one young African gentleman also got out. So the young African gentleman came up and he introduced himself, Brahmananda Prabhu, said Hari Bol, and told me where to come upstairs and everything. And he asked, his name was Bhakta Martin. Martin, you can help him with his bags, and you guys coming up. But Martin came around and, we kind of embraced and we began talking. That person, Bhakta Martin, is now our Bhaktivedanta Shanta Maharaj. So that was my first meeting with Pujapad Shanta Maharaj, right? Was there when I first arrived in Nigeria. He himself is from Ghana, but he was living in Nigeria and working there. He was doing journalism of some sort, I believe. And he lived right down the block from where we were staying. And he would go out every day with Brahmananda to distribute books. So Bhakta Martin, we went upstairs, and then he promised me he would come in the evening and we could talk more, and that he would cook dinner for me, right? I'd have my first meal there with him and Brahmananda. So Brahmananda gave me one room. It was just myself and Brahmananda. And I know outside the door of our flat, there was a huge blue barrel. They're called jerry cans in Nigeria, but it was a huge blue barrel. And it was filled with water. So I really didn't know what it was for when I came upstairs. But then Brahmananda informed me, that's our bathing facility. You take water from there, because in the flat, sometimes the water would get stuck in the pipes and so forth. So just to avoid any complications with plumbing, just go fill up one bucket from there, take it into the shower room, and you shower like that. So it was some austerity, long story short. And I'm not going to mention the other thing. I don't think it's appropriate for here, but the toilet flushing was on a routine, right? You could not just flush every time. Anyways, it was pretty austere, to say the least. And the room situation, I had the room to myself, and Brahmananda Swami had another room. And the thing was the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were like a trained combat army, because they would show up at their opportune time, and you had one of two choices. You could close the window and you would essentially roast, or you could crack your window and you would have to then go to war with these mosquitoes. So you know, I vacillated between the two options each night, and I tried different things like making my own screen, which I made out of like just some metal and so forth. But anyway, it didn't work out. Anyways, later on that evening, Bhakta Martin, who's now Pujapat Shanta Maharaj, he came and he cooked the first meal for me. Now, I had been living at Govinda's restaurant in DC. And of course, the devotees, they would just honor prasadam from the offering that was made from the restaurant prasadam. So it was the normal fare of that day, which was halava, pakoras, 2 kinds of sabji, rice, tamarind chutney, tamarind drink, this thing, that, right? So that was the daily fare. In the morning, of course, we would take fruit and everything, but when the restaurant opened, we would just honor evening prasadam there. And that was the fare on a daily basis. So when Pujapat Shanta Maharaj, and I know he's going to chastise me for this, when he came to cook dinner, he bought something that looked like a log when he first brought it in. But it's a yam, it's called yam, and he peeled it and he began boiling it, and then he added tomatoes and so many different things, and then he began to stir it. As he was stirring it, it got thicker and thicker and thicker, and as we're talking, the wooden spoon, which was a pretty sizable wooden spoon that he was using to stir it, broke. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, we're going to now honor prasadam of whatever it is that he's cooking that was thick enough to break this wooden spoon in half. And I just, in my mind, thought, well, it's definitely not going to be pakoras, halava, sabjis, and all that. Okay. So anyways, but it was called yam porridge, and he then made plantain, and actually it was really, really good. So, you know, we became, I would say from that day, actually, like brothers. You know, we were pretty much inseparable. There was only the two of us at that time, and Brahmananda Swami. And so, you know, we became so close, unbelievably. I did not at that time, because in America I was always driving cars that were automatics. I had not learned how to drive a stick shift car at that time. So Brahmananda wanted me to go on book distribution. He wanted me to take the Daihatsu. So I had to learn how to drive stick shift, and Bhakta Martin would get in the vehicle with me, Pujapat Shanta Maharaj, and we would practice going up and down the road to his house, right? And so I remember the very first day that he was going to go with me, and we were going to go downtown and distribute books together, and we were taking the Daihatsu, that I had not completely mastered it yet. So I remember driving almost halfway downtown in one gear, in second gear or something, right? So anyway, this was the adventures of the learning curve of driving a stick shift. Anyways, once we got downtown, one of the most amazing things happened. We always carried maybe 5 or 6 boxes of books, because all the books were being provided by other temples in America under a program called Books for Africa. So we had books from floor to ceiling in the apartment. In the living room where we had a miniature temple area, books were stacked up floor to ceiling, literally. And I remember when I came in, I made a vow that I would read all of Srila Prabhupada's books, verse and purport, every single one of them. That was like my vrat in part in being in Africa. And by grace of Guru and Gauranga, I was able to accomplish that there over the years that I was there. So, of course, reading through one time is not going to do, but it was a vrat, and I wanted to keep that vow. So, the next day that we went downtown for book distribution, we loaded up the back of the van with cases of books, primarily The Science of Self-Realization, Some Life Comes from Life, Beyond Birth and Death, A Perfection of Yoga, all of the books that we used to distribute primarily at that time. And we didn't really take sets of Srimad Bhagavatam out. We did take a couple of Bhagavad Gitas, not so many. So what we would do is we would start a kirtan, just the two of us. Madanga and kartals, and we would do kirtan, and a crowd would gather around. And when the crowd would gather around, I would give a small talk that this world is temporary, that the soul is beyond the material body, just very basic things regarding Krishna consciousness. And then I would say, we're willing to take any questions and answers, and if you really want all of your questions answered, everything can be found in these books. So we would then start a dialogue of questions and answers, and it was usually a pretty huge crowd. So Shanta Maharaj, who was Bhakta Martin at that time, would be in one section, I'd be in another section, and we'd be answering questions and distributing books. So the very first day that I went out on book distribution, we were selling books and they were just going one after another. So then people gathered around in a crowd and people were, okay, I want one, I want one, I want one. So we would distribute books, and we had gotten down to maybe 4 or 5 books left of Science of Self-Realization in one of the boxes. So I picked up, I think, 1 or 2, and I was, telling about the one, let's pick up the last ones. He said, no, just kind of leave the box. So I said, no, Prabhu, come on, we can't just, we have to get a donation, first of all, for the books, everything. He said, no, just leave it. I've come down here many times with Brahmananda, just leave it. So I was like really kind of perplexed. And he said, come on, Prabhu, let's go to the car. So I was really not willing to do that. I was thinking, no, we can't just leave the books. So I picked up 1 book, and I was saying, okay, we only have a few left. And that was like the cardinal mistake. I said, we only have a few left. People bum rushed me to try to get the last books. And that's why Shanta Maharaj, who had been doing this, told me, just leave it. Just people will work it out. Whoever's able to get there by their Sukriti, they will get the last books. But so now here I am in this big crowd trying to extricate myself, and, people are grabbing at the 1 book in my hand and, tearing the box up to get the other books. So I had never witnessed anything like that before in my life. So here was the standard of book distribution in Nigeria at that time, right? So I believe, and I think when we were driving back, Bhakta Martin, he was laughing because he had told me, this is what happens, right? People really are interested in this is what will happen. So I was super enthusiastic. We had sold out of all the books, obviously. I went back. And Brahmananda, he had been doing this every day, so he knew this was the standard. So to speed things up, because this is kind of going to become long, so I wanted to then figure out a way to do sets of Srimad Bhagavatam, because prior to going to Africa, I was doing sets of Srimad Bhagavatam as book distribution. So Haribol and Chantras Devi, Dandavats. So I was doing sets of Srimad Bhagavatam books. So I wanted to do that again. So I told Brahmananda I just wanted to go around the neighborhood and see if that was viable. So he said, oh, certainly. So I took like 2 or 3 boxes of the Bhagavatam sets and put them in the vehicle. And I just drove right around the neighborhood where we were. And so one interesting thing happened. I went to one home and rang the bell. And one lady came to the door. And the lady looked really familiar. Really familiar. And I didn't say anything to her. I told her, what we were doing. We have a library of spiritual books that deal with the deepest part of the human psychology and human experience. That was part of what I used to say. And she said, oh, really? My husband would really be interested in this kind of literature. He's very deeply involved in spiritual pursuits. So she got her husband. Her husband came to the door. He said, oh, come in, come in. So I came in and I saw another lady. And I saw a second lady there. And I said, wow, she also looks so familiar. But, I don't want to get distracted, and I don't want to also be inappropriate, right? So I sat down to talk to the gentleman. He, by the way, he was dressed like in a kind of robes and so forth, so on. Long story short, it turns out he was a Sufi practitioner, and that he was very much involved in studying metaphysical things and so forth. So he was very interested in the books. In fact, purchased 1 set of Srimad Bhagavatam. But he wanted to speak, so we spoke for about an hour and a half, just talking about, the soul and the concept of the soul in Islam, concept of the soul in Vedic culture. So I'm really involved, and then the ladies both come out, and they have refreshments and some fruit and everything, because they were vegetarian. That was the next thing that we got to talk about. So then I just had to ask, I said, excuse me, you look very familiar. Have you ever been to the States? She said, oh, yeah, myself and my sister. They weren't literally sisters, but it was a friend. Yeah, we're both from the States. I said, oh, really? Yeah, I'm from America. and so forth. She says, oh yeah, we used to work there. We were in the musical community. I said, really? So then she told me they worked for a band that was really popular at that time called Chic. And I remember being on shows with them. So now this is like a whole nother experience. So we began to talk about, music in New York and everything, and how they had moved to Nigeria and they had met this gentleman, and, they were co-wives actually of this gentleman and so forth. So anyways, that was like a really positive experience because it let me know two things: that the idea that you could distribute whole sets of books, Srimad Bhagavatam sets, was viable, and that there were so many interesting people to actually get to not only distribute the books to, but to sit down and have incredible conversations spiritually with. So I continued doing that program after that. I would go on book distribution for some days, and then I would take some days and I would go out, now branching out more to other neighborhoods, to distribute sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that brings us to the next iteration of book distribution. And that was that one day I went to a very, it's more upscale area of Lagos called Victoria Island. And this is like where most of the wealthy people are living and everything. So I remember driving up to one complex, and in that complex it was a gated community where you needed a pass to open the gate, and then the car would go in and then the gate would close behind it. So I looked at that and I thought, well, rather than going house to house here, because the houses were very huge, and that was going to be a little bit of a problem to try to go literally house to house there. If I can go to this apartment complex, I would be able to serve all the apartments. That would be a better idea. So I waited until one car drove in, and I just piggybacked in on that car and found a visitor's parking space, and parked there. And I remember carrying one box with me of Srimad Bhagavatam. And I saw one gentleman enter into one of the apartments. So I went to that apartment because I knew he's home. I knew he'd just gotten there, and I knocked on the door. And he opened the door. He said, yeah, hello, can I help you? And, I told him, yeah, I'm, from America, and I'm here on a spiritual mission. And we have a library, same things I always say, that this library deals with human psychology and the human experience, and how society can be organized for optimal performance and, those kind of things. So he said, really? Bring them in. So I brought the books in, we sat down. So he looked at a few of the covers of Srimad Bhagavatam. He was really enchanted. And he said, let me give you some kind of refreshment. So that then became a dilemma for me, because I know hospitality, like in India, in Africa, is always they want to offer you something. So I thought, I don't want to particularly eat anything, obviously, because I don't know what, obviously people eat meat and everything else. So I told him, well, any fruit or something like that is fine. So he said, oh, well, it's customary in Nigeria to have kola nut. So I did not know what it was, right? So he came out with a small plate, and he broke the kola nut into pieces and, gave me one piece and so forth, and some water. So we're continuing our conversation and so forth. So, I've taken a small bite of the kola nut. It was extremely bitter. So that was my one and only bite, right? And then I went to go ahead and give him his set of books and everything. He said, oh, by the way, I want you to also get one set for my, for the other senator from my constituency. So then it rang in my mind that this building was where the members of parliament lived, right? They were all from different constituencies around Nigeria, and this was the place they lived when they were in Lagos. So I said, oh, yeah, certainly. So then I had a piece of paper, and I would put his name down and his constituency, whoever he was from, what state and so forth. And I went to the apartment he told me and gave the same spiel, except that now I added, oh, that, the member from your constituency has told me and recommended that you should take these. Oh, okay, certainly. He took a piece. Customary, I have to eat a piece of kola nut. So now I'm thinking I found the secret to success, because now I can take a small bite of the kola nut, and that'll suffice as having accepted hospitality, right? I don't have to deal with eating various fruits and different places, right? Because I'm planning to go apartment to apartment here. So then I do that. I go to another apartment. Now I've got 2 names, 3 names, 4 names, 5 names. So everybody who looks at the list and says, yes, I'll take one. So now I've exhausted the 5 boxes I think I had of Srimad Bhagavatam sets. So I decided to, no, I had 1 box left. So then what I did was I took a couple of cantos out and I just told them, I can take your order and then tomorrow I'll come and deliver the order that you make. So everybody was taking orders for a set of Srimad Bhagavatams. I had their names, and the ones obviously that I did not give a set to there, I put down set to be delivered, set to be delivered. So I was completely happy. But I also noticed that I had a headache, and each apartment that I went to, I started speaking faster and faster. I also started, like, when I would go down to the car, I would like run up and down the stairs. I'm sweating. I'm like, what is going on here with this? So anyway, I thought, okay, I need to call it a day. I have enough orders that I need to first go back and kind of get these filled, because I'm going to have to fill up the van to deliver the orders already made. Then I can take more orders. So when I'm driving back, because I'm alone now, I'm like really sweating and feeling a headache, and I'm thinking, wow, did I suddenly contact anybody and I'm getting sick? But I think that couldn't happen that fast. So I get back to Brahmananda Maharaj, and I'm telling, listen, this is a great thing, and I'm so many sets, and this is the place we need to be, and I'm speaking really fast. And he said, slow down. What's wrong with you? Right? So he said, did you take anything? I said, no, because he was worried that maybe I had accepted some drink somewhere and that might have had something. I said, no. You know, I only took water and like a little fruit. In fact, I only took a little piece of one nut that they have, this cola nut. So then he looks at me and he says, you know, Haribol, listen, the cola nut is an intoxicant, right? Because it's like, I guess, like pan and betel in India. So now I'm thinking, oh, this is what happened, right? So now I said, okay, that's it for me for the day. I have to go lay down and get this over with. So he's laughing in the meantime. So anyway, and then later on I tell, you know, Bhakta Martin, Shanta Maharaj, what happened. He also laughs at it, everything. But then anyway, I continued doing that for, I think, several weeks, and so many sets of Srimad Bhagavatam there. So this was the nature of the preaching. And even those books that we would distribute downtown, when we would have the Sunday program, well, that's a little bit later on, because the next thing that happens is that the place we're staying in, which belongs to the textile factory, is now going to be sold or transferred of hands or something, but we have to leave. And I remember thinking, you know, like where we're going to go, because Brahmananda had gone, and he used to make life members at night. So myself, Bhakta Martin, and Brahmananda at night after our book distribution, we would go out every night and go and make life members. In ISKCON, that was a process where you went to different people and you asked them to become a life member of the ISKCON society. They would get a little passport. They would get gifts like a Japamala, a subscription to Back to Godhead magazine, and the ability to travel to the temples and have a free 3-night stay or something like that. So anyway, we would do that at night. So I remember us talking to many life members, and there was like no recourse of where we could suddenly move to. So then Brahmananda said, I think we should just get in the van, right, in the Daihatsu, and, oh, no. By that time, we had a second van. It was a little larger, right? So I had that one van that I used daily. Then Brahmananda had a bigger van. So he said we should take the bigger van, and we should just travel and live out of the van and distribute books and so forth. So I thought, okay, that sounds good. That's adventurous. It's exciting. It's truly pioneering spirit. So I was gung-ho to do that. On the very day that we were due to move out of that flat, a gentleman from South India and his daughter came to visit us. And they mentioned that they had heard from one life member that we were in need of a facility, and that they understood we would have to, you know, exit where we were. He said both myself and my daughter are medical doctors, and we've acquired a facility in a place called Ilupeju, right, which is another neighborhood, a little more upscale, and that we cannot use the full facility because it's huge. So we're thinking to take one half and we will donate the use of the other half for your temple. So that becomes the first real temple space that we have in Lagos, right, or in Nigeria, actually. And that place is just off the main road. It's called Ikorodo Road. It's just off that main road, maybe 1 or 2 blocks over. And now we have our own facility where we can actually not only do book distribution, all the other things we were doing, but now we can accommodate having programs there. So eventually we allow other devotees to come now, because now there's also facility for other devotees to come. So who comes? Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu comes, Brajalila Devi, she comes, Brajalila Dasi, she comes, Srinath Prabhu, Parameshwari, who is now Prema Bhakti Didi, she comes. So we have a nice crew of devotees there. And of course, Bhakta Martin now comes and he's staying full-time with us in the temple and everything. And so now, you know, we have a place and we begin to fix the place up, and we're just doing the downstairs because it's a huge place, has a downstairs and upstairs. So on that first week before devotees arrived, the first couple of weeks, we only cleaned up the downstairs area. We didn't even go upstairs. We felt there was no need. We had enough rooms and temple space downstairs, so we concentrated on fixing that up and being able to have a Sunday program. When the other devotees arrived, because there were some Grihastha couples involved, so myself, my former partner, and Srinath Prabhu and, you know, his wife at that time. So we had to now utilize the upstairs space because we had brahmacharis downstairs, and so we had to use upstairs. So the very first time we went upstairs, we realized that the prior owners of that place had used that place for a very negative thing, right? I think it was like an abortion clinic or something, the upstairs part. So we were completely distraught. We went down to tell Brahmananda that we don't know if we can stay up there. Even cleaning that place, the aura, the atmosphere, the vibe of that, how can we do this? So Brahmananda Prabhu said, listen, we'll have a Mahakirtan, do even a fire yajna downstairs. And of course, we will go up and we will chant and do like Nrsimha Puja, so many things. So anyway, we went through all of those different rituals and so forth in order to purify that space. And of course, primary to everything was Harinam. So we just did Harinam continuously up in that space to try to purify that atmosphere. We eventually got it cleaned and everything, and we had done all the purification things I mentioned. So now Grihasthas were staying upstairs, and we had brahmacharis in the temple room downstairs. So now whenever we would go on book distribution, we could invite people back to our temple. So maybe less than 2 weeks into the idea of a Sunday program is packed, right? It is literally packed. There are people coming continuously. And so we're like really fired up that the preaching is really great. And one of the things was I would give class. If Brahmananda Maharaj did not want to give class, which many times he would delegate giving class to, you know, senior devotees who were there, because now we had other devotees there, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, Srinath Prabhu, myself. So he would have us give class on Sundays. And I remember once giving class, my first time, and then at the end of the class asking for questions. And, you know, all the hands go up, and so you're taking questions one at a time. And everybody who asked a question pretty much had been somebody who had gotten a book on book distribution. So they wouldn't ask you a general question. They would ask a question like, on page 52 of Life Comes From Life, third paragraph, it mentions here. So then I'm thinking, wow, do I remember paragraph 3 from Life Comes From Life? Right? You understand? So the questions were so detailed and specific. So it was really ecstatic, just a question and answer session. So I remember at one point, we started for this, you know, for just to make the program viable in terms of time, we would, you know, have a small kirtan at the beginning, have a smaller class, and the question and answer session became the dominance of the class. And then after that, there was always kirtan, and the kirtans went on for hours, like hour and a half, 2 hours, right? So to make the program more concise, because you still had to distribute prasad, that would be the norm. So this was the nature of preaching and its evolution. I'm going to end by just describing maybe one thing that was also very prominent part of preaching in Africa as a whole, and that was after we had established a few centers in Nigeria, and many devotees took part. I need to start naming these devotees. His Grace Ishwara Prabhu, who's now living in Vrindavan. His Grace Ajay Krishna Prabhu, who is now in London. One devotee was named Shruti Kirti. He was a radio personality, and he used to do so much help. He became Shruti Das. Of course, all the American devotees, so I mentioned Brajalila Devi, Bhuta Bhavan Prabhu, Srinath, Premavati Didi, Hari Murari Prabhu, all who came. Later on, much later on, I think Sikhi Mahiti Prabhu came. Again, if I've forgotten any of the devotees who came, that. And then we have many local devotees who had joined. Of course, Ishwara, Chandrasekhara Prabhu, Gopal Prabhu. So just many, many stalwart devotees who were there in the beginning of the preaching in Nigeria. So, of course, other temples were opened in Calabar, in Benin, and other places. So Varaha Prabhu, all those devotees who came slightly later on, but who were instrumental in opening all these temples, much debt of gratitude is owed to everyone. So then the very next thing was that Brahmananda called me in the room one day, said, listen, we have done like yeoman's work here. I received a text from, not a text, but a message from Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj that he believes that you should now go to open a temple in a different place. So we started thinking of places to go, like Cameroon, or to go to one of the countries where it was predominantly English speaking, like Liberia, Sierra Leone. So I had gone to Liberia while I was preaching in Nigeria, and there was some danger there. So we decided to hold on that. Sierra Leone, we didn't feel at the time that there was enough of a foundation to really get something going. So Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj wrote back and said he had already been to Ghana once with, whose name was Mahamantra at that time, who later became Shanta Maharaj, right? He had gone there with him, so we should go to Ghana. So then I remember we packed up, myself, Shanta Maharaj, Rajalila, and one other devotee named Lakshmi Patidas. And we took a vehicle and we drove from Ghana through Benin, then through Togo and into Ghana. And it was the most wonderful trip because you're driving along the coast of Africa and it's extremely beautiful and everything. Especially when we got to Togo, to Lomé, it was extremely beautiful. And I think I told jokingly one story of how I did some very not intelligent thing in Lomé, right? But anyway, so we enter Ghana, and of course, the preaching in Ghana begins. And for me, that was one of the greatest experiences of preaching in my whole life. Of course, now having come under the guidance of Srila Gurudev and continuing to travel and preach regularly, there's so much depth of understanding and so many other things by the grace of Srila Gurudev and our Guru Vargas that's there. But as a spirit of serving the movement of Mahaprabhu at that time, it was completely amazing. So after we, slept a couple of nights in a hotel because we had nowhere to stay literally, and we would go to a relative of Shanta Maharaj to take prasadam, and the prasadam was amazing. It was always simple but amazing. And then we finally got one place, and that place was in a neighborhood called Alajo. And we got a small house, and at that time, we went out and started to do the same thing we did in Nigeria, take out books, preach, and immediately a couple of devotees joined. Ekachakra Prabhu, and I think Gyanadas started coming. He hadn't joined yet, but he started coming, and one Bhaktina Elizabeth, one Mataji. So we began just that small crew in the house of Alajo, going out daily, preaching, distributing books, doing so many things. And then eventually, we started getting more participation. People were coming to the temple on a regular basis, not moving in because we didn't have facility. But we decided we needed to get a bigger temple. So Pujabhat Shanta Maharaj who was Mahamantra at that time, he went back to Nigeria to tell Brahmananda of the success we were having and to see if we could get a fronting of some funds to get a bigger place. So Brahmananda was pleased with what was going on, and he gave some money, and we had also raised some money there in Ghana. And we were driving around, and we came to one neighborhood called Adoko. And in Adoko, there's like a hill. So we drove up that hill, and we got to the top of the hill. There was a huge mansion, which was unfinished, but it was right at the top of the hill and oversaw the entire area. So we thought, oh, we have to get this place. So we contacted the owner, and he said, yes, I can lease this place to you, but it's pretty expensive. So the money that Mahamantra Prabhu, Shanta Maharaj, had gotten from Brahmananda, what we had raised in Ghana, we gave that to him, and with a promise to give him more. So actually, Shanta Maharaj had to go back to Nigeria and get a little more money because we told Brahmananda what we had acquired. So we got a little more money, and then we came back, and also, yeah, I think Rajalila Dasi had come back to America at one point and was doing Sankirtan and also raised some money. So between those sources, we were able to get that facility. Once we got that facility, preaching just overnight practically sort of exploded. So Gyanadas moved into the temple. Jiva, he kind of joined when we were in Alajo actually. But he, moved in full time there as well. Ekachakra, just so many, Ramanuja, Prabhu, Ahimsa, so many devotees I'm thinking now by name. Shrivas Prabhu, now he's actually a guru, doing the service of guru in Africa, right, in Ghana, right? Later on, His Holiness Bhakti Dhyadhananda Maharaj, I believe. His name was Parikshit Prabhu at that time, very sweet devotee, always very dedicated and serious. He came later on. But all of those persons who are now serving in the role of guru there, they all had come in various iterations back at that time. I think Parikshit, who's now Bhakti Dhammadham Maharaj, he came a little later on. And Bhakti Vasudev Swami also came later on. But in Ghana, it was just so amazing, the preaching facility and the amount of devotees who were coming. It got to a point where when we would do Harinam, we would do Sundararti first. Then we would come onto the porch area of the temple building. And we would start a kirtan. When we would start the kirtan, we would then come out of the gates into the main area. And there was a market right across the street from the temple. The market would shut down, and they would take torches, and they would follow us. And as we passed each marketplace with each set of vendors, they would do the same. So by the time we got down to the main road at the bottom of that hill, and I would think the complete circle from the temple to the bottom to the main street there, around and back up, maybe a mile and a half, something like that, I would conjecture. But all of the different vendors would shut down, and we'd have all these torches and maybe 100 and something people on the Harinam. They would circle all the way back to the temple. And then we would go up on, again, the balcony area of the temple, the first floor balcony area, and we would go into the rip-roaring Haribol, Haribol. And so you'd see all of these torches and everything. So it's just like something out of Chaitanya Charitamrita or Chaitanya Bhagavat. So it was so inspiring. And then we would conclude with the Nrsimha Pranam, because at that time in this context, that's what we did. And, after that, everyone would go back to their respective markets. The lady directly across the street, she would give us a big bag of sort of what is, I don't know in America what you, it's like a donut, but without the hole, right? She'd give us a big bag of those to share. And so it's just very, very ecstatic times preaching there. The Ghana temple, I stayed in Ghana for almost 3 years, and the temple just continually grew and grew and grew. We ended up developing a Gurukul for small children there that was run by one devotee, Raivata Muni, and then later on, Guru Das Prabhu. And it was just very successful. We had many grahastas who had started to come to live. And so we had some places surrounding the temple, and it was just very much flourishing. Of course, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj came. I think I told the story once he came during, I think it was a gasoline shortage. So we were unable to get food supplies into the markets, actually, literally. And this went on for about a month or something. Other than that, I have to tell you, in Ghana, prasadam was an amazing phenomenon, because you could go to the market, and the Fulani, they are a cow herding tribe, and they would make fresh curd that was, it's called wagas, but it was incredible, right? And all of the various vegetable dishes that were made in Ghana were just, it was incredible. Nigeria also, everything was very good, but Ghana, it was just really, really somehow or another very special. And so also we began to teach the devotees how to make various things like samosas, pakoras, and all the different sabjis. So once when Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj came, because of this gasoline shortage, we could not get a supply of different things to make. And so Maharaj, he was in Nigeria, I believe, and he called to say that he was coming. And I told Maharaj, maybe this is not the best time to come because of what's going on. So he said, oh, okay, I'll think about it. I'll maybe take your advice and I'll think about it. So once we did the Harinam, because we would maintain our program, and we came back to the temple and we did the concluding part of Harinam, which was always very ecstatic. And then we immediately stopped, Jai Shri Nrsimha Bhagwan ki Jai, Shri Sachinandan Gaur Hari ki Jai. And just as we were concluding the sort of Jai Dhwani, a taxi pulls up and it's Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. So he steps out and the kirtan starts all over again. So then another hour and a half later, we're saying the Jai Dhwani. But the point is, we had no facility to really offer anything at that time. So I remember there was a place we used to go to regularly, which was a American family living in Ghana, and they had a bread factory. So we went there and they would make fresh whole wheat bread. So we bought 2 loaves because they were rationing it. And we wanted to at least have that to offer to Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. So we were able to get that and a few other things. And so he sat to eat with the devotees, and we cut the bread, everything, and devotee baked it and had some other things there, and we gave them that. And the devotees basically had 3 things: peanuts, bananas, and oranges. That was the meal at the time because we didn't have any other sources at that time. So Maharaj looked and he said, where is the other bread? You can bring out the other bread. Devotees can take that bread now. So we told Maharaj, there's only 2 loaves, and those 2 loaves are really meant to kind of, for the time that you're here, to last for that period of time. So then Maharaj took his bread and started cutting it into pieces and putting on all the devotees' plates. So I thought it was just a very wonderful gesture of his kindness and so forth to devotees, and his mood also of humility and so forth. So Maharaj then traveled back, and I remember we continued with preaching, which was just outstanding. It got to the point where when we'd have a Sunday program, what we would do was, we had found a private beach that was strictly accommodated for devotees. It's called Botiana. And we would pass through the village going to that particular beach, and as soon as we entered and do a little bit of Harinam, all of the young children in the village, they would go up the trees and bring fresh dabs, it's called in India, but fresh coconut. And so we would take all the fresh coconut and everything, go to the beach, do Harinam. We would give a class there on the beach, and then allow devotees to go swimming. Ladies would go one section, gentlemen another, and go swimming, and then come back. 1/2 of the temple would stay back to prepare for Sunday feast. The following week, that half that stayed back would then go to the beach, and the other half would stay back. Right? So I know what you're thinking. Mukunda, did you go every week? I think so. I think so. Of course, that was in the mood of service, right? So, but anyway, just very wonderful atmosphere of preaching, and that went on for like 3 years. And then, of course, I have to conclude this because this is absolutely too long. There were many, many significant things. The meeting of presidents in Africa. After we left Ghana, we went to Zambia and Zimbabwe to open temples, and then to Kenya to help develop the temple they had in Mombasa. And in all of these places, but especially in West Africa, the temples flourished and grew to amazing heights. And I think, I always pray that any kripa that may come from the mercy of Sriman Mahaprabhu for trying to do that seva, that may that somehow be a sprinkling on me in my continued effort to understand and reach Radha Dasyam and pure love of God. So I'll have to end here because this is extremely long. Like I said, I did this before in 10 different videos. But the devotee asked, and they were very sincere devotees, and they wanted to understand that sort of synopsis, at least, of the adventures of pioneering and preaching in Africa. It's something that I cherish always and still to this day. Even on my Facebook page, you can see the picture there of many of the devotees that I originally spoke about. That picture was taken perhaps in 1981 or something, and it's all the devotees who had helped to form that second temple in Lagos in Ilupeju. We're standing outside the door at that time. Of course, there are many adventures in all these places which I cannot go over for lack of time, and similarly many adventures in Central Africa when we're opening temples there. But I beg devotees, please give me your kripa, and please, if anyone takes up inspiration like that, it is never too late to pioneer Krishna consciousness somewhere in the world. Jai Hari Bol Radhe Radhe Vanchakalpaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhuveva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.